Good morning! Winterview is back with another brief dialogue for his dear friend, Annastacey. The voice feeling a bit warbly for some reason this morning, possibly due to a lack of coffee and a poor night's sleep for some reason. Today's brief dialogue is on a particularly amusing topic, one that I come up against in the clinic quite frequently. Another behaviour of the mind. The subject, Puritanism. Haha, I can't even say it. Puritanism is the word. This relates more broadly to the other subjects I've talked about, such as adequacy, inadequacy, as well as the search for purity versus liberation versus purification. God, I really cannot talk this morning. Struggling to use my words. Anyway, I hope you forgive me. Once again in my car, driving to work. Apologies for the audio quality. Puritanism is, broadly speaking, the belief that we can somehow improve the person. It relates to purification, but this is more broadly the mechanism in the mind. Puritanism is the idea that we can improve the self to some imagined ends or some end goal. It relates also to perfectionism in a way. We see perfectionism in the clinic quite frequently, and it is considered a mental health disorder. It is believed to relate to obsessive and compulsive behaviours, and I might cautiously suggest, this is just cautiously, no research, suggests that Puritanism might fall indeed on the same spectrum. This requires a few feats of mental gymnastics to arrive at. First and foremost, as with everything, we have to imagine a person, a conceptualized entity who lives in the body or is the body. Then we have to feel powerfully inadequate about this on some level, which is fair enough because having no actual substance, the existence of the imagined entity is always shaky at best. To overcome these feelings, and when I say these feelings, it's not as if we walk around feeling powerfully inadequate in a tangible way, although that might be true for some people. There is an existential angst built into the idea of being a separate entity, an individual. And it requires a lot of props, a lot of supports to keep it maintained. And I've talked about some of those in the other dialogues. Puritanism is a belief structure that something is better than something else. And not only that, there's some imagined ultimate goal. And you find Puritanism across so many domains, but the most fascinating realm for Puritanism is religion, and even the so-called quest for enlightenment and liberation. You'll find Puritanism creeping in from all quarters in all discussions. So I thought it'd be interesting to have a little look at some of the mechanisms behind Puritanism. The idea is, you see it very it's markedly, I can't think of a word for this. You see it across orthodox religions in a very traditional idea that the human or the person is somehow dirty, impure, gross, etc. Ideas that the world is somehow flawed. You need that setup at the start. So this is maybe call it an underlying belief. There's a problem with the world. And what that's really saying is there's a problem with the person, the seeker. this seeker can never see the inherent perfection and exquisite beauty in the world. The seeker is always blind to that. The person is always blind to that because of the, we'll call it the space-time realm and the future orientation of the mind. The mind is always looking to a future point to see that perfection, or is always imagining grades and hierarchies of the appearance of the world, in which at which it demarks a sort of imagined point of good, not so good, amazing, etc. It makes up its own orders of magnitude. Puritanism is quite an insidious thought trap, you might say. It's the subtle idea, or not so subtle in some cases, that the mind can figure things out. That not only that the world, the appearance, can be graded in terms of the qualities or the inherent values and powers of the objects in the world, such that some objects are pure or good or better, and some obviously are the opposite, impure, etc. And this goes for thoughts and concepts as well, and ideologies even. And when it comes to ideologies, this is when Puritanism takes on a new sort of uniform. It becomes quite militant. Let's have a look at an example that I see quite often. In mental health, and especially around the clinical issue of depression, you find a lot of Puritanism in the thinking of the clients who experience depression. Often they've struggled for a long time to become pure somehow, and have now failed at that, and are impure, or it's confirmed that they are impure in some ways. But what is it really pointing to? What can be pure in the minds of the Puritan? The funny thing is that mind has to codify behaviour with some sort of imagined list, and usually it's cultural. The mind chooses a list of cultural criteria to aspire or ascribe to. I'm going to give an example that I see in the media quite a lot, and we see it coming out of the Indian culture. We have they have a very funny thing in India, and I've been there quite a few times, about not showing nudity in their films. It's very funny, but it seems like the directors really want to do it, but they try their best to suggest it as in the most sort of titillating way, like wet fabric on flesh and veils and all that sort of stuff. So you never really see any nudity, and there's this idea that nudity, to be nude, is impure somehow. And now this is totally a fiction of the mind. Like, it's totally a mind story about the idea that something could be pure or impure. And so nudity in this context is impure, and therefore you've got a great way for the mind now to lock on to a goal of sorts. What the mind is going to do is, now that it has figured out that nudity is impure, it's very simple now. All I have to do is do the opposite. I have to be the opposite of nude. I have to be fully clothed at all times, and maybe even decked out in some kind of finery, or maybe even a sort of, let's take it a step further. Maybe if I wear white, that'll be somehow more pure than other types of clothes. And then the mind is great. This is what I love. It goes that step further. It looks at the actual quality of the fabric now and goes, how is this manufactured? This was manufactured unethically. What I'm going to do now is seek out ethical fabric. And then the mind can even trump that. It's like, were the farmers ethical? these farmers were religious, were a small sect of Buddhist monks who were pure of heart when they harvested the silk for my white robe, and then it gets even more hysterical because the mind can even outdo itself there. It's like, how pure were these Buddhists? Was one of them sinning secretly? And then, of course, and on it goes. And there's a delight in the mind at finding the next level of purity. And the belief that's powering the whole thing is future improvement, always future improvement. And it goes back to the other mechanism too of distancing oneself from the shadow, the thing that you most don't want to be or have represented in your life. You have to distance yourself from that. And you get it in debates as well. Like you'll write a comment, say on a forum, an internet forum, and you see this on internet forums, or YouTube comments are even more hysterical, where someone makes they're trying to make a comment about, let's say, that they're wading into a debate on maybe, I don't know, any issue at all, and someone points out they've made a typo in their comment, and therefore the comment is now invalid because of the typo. That was an impure. That comment is now impure. The other thing too is that I see this in perfectionists do this one a lot, where they're going to make something from scratch. They're going to make a recipe, for example, or build a bookcase out of wood. And because they're Puritans, because the mind is puritanical, it has to do it the right way. So it has to create a code by which the right way can be known. And of course, the mind, the puritanical mind loves tradition, especially very austere traditions that maybe go back a long way and never let anyone into the because it's so strict, because it's so pure. And you can't just make a bookcase if you're a Puritan with a saw and some nails and some wood glue and all that. You have to choose your wood very carefully. You have to use the right wood. You have to use ethical wood that fell naturally. It wasn't cut down. You have to use like a Japanese samurai saw, rather than just the one you bought down in the local hardware shop, because that's impure and this is pure. When you're making a recipe for baking, you have to use the right ingredients, the proper ingredients, because then it's right and then it's pure. You can tell I find this completely hysterical, this subject. And the Puritan, when we're talking about enlightenment, this is where I find it gets even more funny, it's just a crack up. So the puritanical mind, on hearing about enlightenment, just loves the idea from the start. It's the idea that in the future, at some point, this person who is deeply, deeply flawed can improve to such a degree that they can be enlightened. It's a totally personalized journey. And of course, it's in time and space. It's not now, it's in the future. And of course, purifying, or Puritanism, is the journey. You've got to become more pure, and then I will be rewarded. So these were probably the kids, the good kids, the kids who would write other kids' name on the board when the teacher was out of the classroom, who were talking. The kids that really liked the idea of having rules from a young age. So the mind in the sort of enlightenment game, in the pursuit for enlightenment, decides that it hears about, say, meditation as a way to become enlightened. But not just any meditation, the best kind of meditation. You have discussions on what's the best meditation for enlightenment. Not understanding the concept of enlightenment from the outset, but we'll forgive the Puritans that. But the idea that one meditation is better, that vegetarianism is better than eating meat in the Enlightenment game. The other thing too that the Puritan hates, just hates, is the idea that someone who seems impure can claim to be enlightened. They anthropomorphize enlightenment as if it's a personal achievement that they will get at some point. And once they have that belief locked in, then they can't accept impure versions of enlightenment or liberation. They love their gurus or their masters to be very humble and simple, and to use very austere language, and to have no desires, no wants, no needs, nothing impure. These are vegetarian masters who are exquisitely humble, who want nothing from the world, because they've transcended all that, and they're so pure in that, and their love radiates purely from the pure heart that beats in the pure vessel that is their body. Or they've transcended the body. They don't need sex anymore because they're so pure. So the other belief that runs alongside of this is a belief that there's a person, the belief in the individual who is going to get something. It's going to get enlightened in the future when they're pure enough, when they've reached it the right way. Not just any enlightenment, but the pure kind of enlightenment, not the guru on the street who works works 2 jobs and got divorced and went bankrupt, or gets drunk on Saturday nights. That's no good. That's not the guru I want to follow. That's a fake guru. I'm going to follow the pure guru with the pure teaching. And that's the other great one I see all the time. It's teachings that are pure. This is a pure teaching. This goes back to what the originator of the teaching really, really meant. And there's nothing wrong with Puritanism. Ultimately, I'm having a laugh at it because I find it hysterically funny. I think I find the idea that the Puritans' idea that this will happen, that enlightenment will happen to a person in the future, is very funny now. It's so, and there's a sweetness to it as well, like an innocence. The mind is so innocent. It's like a little child, and even the abhorrent, violent acts that we see around the world, there's a double edge to that violence. There's the horror of the violence, and then there's this very funny, sweet innocence to the violence of what are you doing, mind? It's, of course you're engaging in acts of violence. You don't know any better. It's not known. Yeah. The mind actually thinks it's doing good in those acts. So, yeah, Puritanism. It makes me laugh. I think if we, I think in religions as well, you have sects in most religions who distance themselves from the religion on purpose because they find that the masses are somehow impure, and that they want to go for the pure teaching. Let's choose Christianity as a good example. You have the sort of weekend Christian who goes to church on a Sunday and, pretty much doesn't do much else during the week. And then you find people that don't like that idea. They've got to, if you're a Christian, you've got to commit, and you've got to do more, you've got to study more, and then so they study more and they attend more meetings, and then even in that it becomes dissatisfying, remembering that the individual is always dissatisfied. So they set up their own little group, like going to Bible group 5 nights a week is not enough. We've got to really commit to it. I'm now gonna play the Bible on an audio loop when I sleep, so I'm always surrounded by it or something. And then you get into the nuances of the Bible. Maybe I'm using the wrong Bible. Maybe I need to go back to the Aramaic version, and maybe I need to learn Aramaic to really get the essence of the original text. That's what I'm missing. So there's the other fun dynamic in Puritanism. It's that sense that you're missing out on something until you get the pure teaching or the pureness, and on it goes. It's like a rabbit hole that it just goes on and on. There's always the next level of purity. And the unfortunate thing is the mind will torture itself when it fails in the quest for purity. Like, it really will beat itself up. There'll be a lot of angst and distress and, oh my god, I meant to be vegetarian, but I just realized I ate this product which had traces of meat in it. Oh my, it's a disaster. I won't get to where I'm going now. It's a bit of a shame. It's a sad state of affairs. So I getting back to an earlier comment, I think it does link up on the obsessive compulsive spectrum, at least in the clinical levels of distress, where we see what I call mind lock. The mind locks onto an object as if it's real, and then grades it as in gives it an order of magnitude relative to other objects, and then can't shift off that object. It becomes obsessed with the object, sort of recycles it around and around and around endlessly. Anyway, that was a very brief dialogue on a subject that I find hysterical. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that one, on purity, Puritanism. Make sure when you reply or comment, you don't make any typos. Use a traditional font if you can, something that's humble and sincere, somehow pure as well. That would be marvelous.